Welcome back. All right, so today's draft is a tricky one. Today I'm looking back at the 1983 draft, and it's a tricky one because it has Makarov in it, it has Kasatonov in it, both of them very good Soviet players who didn't come over for a long time after. So if they had come over right away, if they'd been playing in the NHL from when they were 19, 20 years of age right through until they retired, Makarov might have gone as high as 2 or 3 in this draft. Kasatonov absolutely would have gone top 10, probably very early, but I have to go by the NHL careers they had more than anything else, so that's going to knock them down a bit. At least I think so. But because, again, Makarov was a supremely talented player, that whole line was. And by the time they came over to play in the NHL, well, they were still good. They were not at their peak. Part of the reason why they were allowed to come over. So, drafting first again are the Minnesota North Stars. I'm wearing Buffalo because Buffalo drafts at 5, 10, and 11 in this draft. Really could have just completely revamped themselves. The one thing is they did get a hit at 5 with Barrasso. The players taken at 10 and 11 are not in this redraft. All right, so number 1 in this redraft. And I get the feeling that we'll be having a debate about 1 and 2, which is why when I was looking over this draft, I was like, I got to do it. So Steve Eiserman ends up going at 1. Eiserman was originally taken at 4 by the Detroit Red Wings, proving that sometimes the Red Wings draft best when they draft 4th, which is something we still see now. But yeah, Eiserman, I can't argue that he's had the best career out of anybody in this draft class. Absolutely fantastic. And just think about it, if Minnesota had still drafted Modano, and you had Modano, and you had Eiserman down the middle, yeah, that's the end of that dream. But yeah, so Eiserman, I think, goes at number 1, which means at number 2, moving up quite a bit from where he was originally drafted, I cannot argue with Dominik Hasek, who was originally drafted at 199th, moving all the way up to 2nd. So you can argue Hasek ahead of Eiserman, depending on what you're using as a metric. To me, Eiserman, one of the best players of all time. Hasek, one of the best goalies I've ever seen. I don't think you can go wrong at 1 or 2 with either of these players. And if Hasek had come over and played for the Whalers, that would have made quite a difference to how things turned out for Hartford. However, of course, he had a really good run with the Buffalo Sabres, Detroit as well, and of course a little cup of coffee there with the Senators in between. But yeah, really, Hasek, what a fantastic career. And he's another one, too, that didn't come over that early in his career. And if he had, I think we'd have a different conversation with Hasek as well. But by the time he comes over to North America, he's still pretty good and proves that goaltenders can stay in their prime for longer into their careers, usually than we see with forwards or for defensemen even. All right, so number 3, this is where the work kind of shows up. And yet, I don't think I need to change who got drafted at 3. I don't. The number 3 draft pick originally to the New York Islanders, drafted number 3 again, Pat LaFontaine. Again, Hall of Fame player, fantastic resume, absolutely great player all around. And yeah, one of those guys who, the New York Islanders, a team that at the time in 1983 had just won their 4th straight Stanley Cup, they didn't need a Pat LaFontaine. I remember complaining about that too, being like, well, how did the Islanders have a really good up-and-coming player, and then Pat Flatley was coming up too, and it looked like he was going to be a really good top 6 forward, and they already had a dynasty, and so I had some concerns that the dynasty would just carry on. It didn't, but that wasn't on Pat LaFontaine, who had an excellent career for himself in various locations. Then we get to number 4. At number 4 to the Detroit Red Wings. All right, so for Detroit fans, does getting Cam Neely at number 4 help? So Cam Neely, a player who, if not for injury, we would have been looking at a 500-goal career. He still makes the Hall of Fame. There's still some debate about him being in the Hall of Fame, but still, at his peak, he was fantastic. He did have one season where he had 50 goals in 50 games. And really, just remarkable hands. It's a shame that injury shortened his career. Otherwise, Neely might be ahead of LaFontaine on this one. I couldn't argue that even if Neely had been in his prime the whole way through, I can't argue him ahead of Hasek. I might be able to argue him ahead of LaFontaine. At this point, I couldn't. But yeah, Neely at number 4. I don't know if that's going to make Red Wing fans feel better or not. And then at 5, there are a couple of ways I could go with this one, to be honest. But Yeah. To Buffalo at 5, Rick Talkett. Tough player. Originally drafted 121st overall in the NHL. Yeah, 121st. Excellent power forward. So those are 2 power forwards right after each other. This is a very tough draft class too. I talked about the 1988 draft. The 1983 draft might be able to take the 1988 draft in a fight. That might be a way for that to work out. Rick Talkett, absolutely one of the most intimidating players in his prime, and a good point scorer, goal scorer, could kind of do a little bit of everything. Pittsburgh really got the benefits of him when he got there. And yeah, Talkett's still, of course, around the game, well respected around the game. And yeah, I cannot argue anybody over Talkett at this spot. So at 6, do I want to go with the player that people really didn't like? In his career, the player that people really didn't like. And you know I'm going to. It's New Jersey, right? Claude Lemieux. Claude Lemieux originally drafted at 26th overall, instead in this draft being taken at number 6. Claude Lemieux, controversial to say the least in his career. A player who, I mean, the debate over how tough he was or wasn't is certainly out there. And if you're a Detroit fan, you may have an opinion on Claude Lemieux. There are other fan bases too that may have an opinion on Claude Lemieux. But in the end, I mean, he scored big goals. He was really a guy who came up big in the playoffs and won numerous Stanley Cup rings in numerous organizations. So I really can't take that away from Claude Lemieux. And so, yeah, he goes at 6 in this redraft. Number 7. A player that Pete... No, I'm going to do this. Tom, it's 2 R's and 2... Yep, there we go. Did a career video on him lately. Why not have the Toronto Maple Leafs take Tom Barrasso, who drops from 5 to 7, not because his career was any kind of a disappointment, because it wasn't, but because this is a pretty stacked draft class. You guys might be seeing why I picked this draft class. I went through all of them, and I was like, hey, you know, 83. And for the record, this is the last one that I had written down that I said, man, that would be really fun to do, and take a look at where I might take players. So Tom Barrasso goes at 7 to the Toronto Maple Leafs. That would have been quite the story. He would have been a fix for their goaltending. I liked Alan Bester and Ken Reggett, sure, but if you have Barrasso there instead of Bester, who knows? Barrasso was absolutely fantastic, especially early in his career. Could have helped turn around things for Toronto in their own end. But at any rate, he doesn't get taken there. At 8, the Winnipeg Jets take Kevin Stevens. Kevin Stevens, originally drafted 108th overall by the LA Kings. Gets moved to the Pittsburgh Penguins and, of course, had an amazing run. If Stevens' run had lasted longer, I would draft him earlier. But, of course, Stevens' run tragically did not last as long as it should have. He had his own demons off the ice that affected his on-ice output. And so, yeah, and injuries took their toll with Kevin Stevens. And it's all interlaced with one another, too. So, in the end, it's a sad story with Stevens, but he was the best left winger in the game and one of the best power forwards as well. So, yeah, Stevens, number 8. This really is quite the draft when it comes to having guys that they can score and they can clear out the front of the net by themselves if they want to. Number 9. Going number 9 to Vancouver. Dropping from 6. John Mcclane. John Mcclane, again, good scorer, a good playoff performer as well. I did a video on him recently. He's not just the diehard guy with Bruce Willis there. He was an actual hockey player first. I would love if somehow somebody came up with some way to explain that John Mcclane, the hockey player, and John Mcclane, the character played by Bruce Willis, were actually the same guy, and that the story was rewritten just to hide the fact that John Mcclane's a hero. But at any rate, really good long career, and if the Canucks had drafted him, sure, I would have missed Neely, and Neely never would have gone to Boston if Detroit had drafted him, but yeah, McLean's not too bad himself. Then at number 10, okay, I'm gonna go this way with the Buffalo Sabres. originally drafted at number 80 was Esa Tikkanen. Esa Tikkanen, one of the best pests in the history of the game. And really, in all honesty, a player that, he was really, really frustrating to play against. He was not fun. Wayne Gretzky found that out himself when he was an LA King and Tikkanen was still an Oiler. I remember Tikkanen chasing him around the ice and Gretzky yelling at him to STFU. And it was really entertaining. I still remember Tikkanen going behind the Montreal net, taking Brian Hayward's stick and trying to put it in his jersey, and Hayward bashing him with his blocker because he was trying to take his stick. And of course, Tikkanen goes to the box because you're not allowed to take the goalie's stick and put it under his jersey. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Tikkanen, who laughed all the way to the penalty box, didn't ask the ref, what rule did I break? Because really, there's nothing in there about stuffing a stick inside your jersey. Then at number 11, I'm gonna go with moving up from 46th. Okay, so Buffalo takes Bob Probert. I'm just laughing because I'm looking at what Buffalo gets out of this draft. So number 11, they draft Bob Probert. Probert's remembered for his fighting skill, but he also had a period of time there where he's a pretty good scorer as well. And I always thought it was a shame that time where he was able to score goals and points didn't last longer than it did. Of course, tragically, he's no longer with us. But just envisioning a draft where Buffalo comes out with Rick Talkett, Esa Tikkanen, and Bob Probert, you would have quite a different franchise for the Buffalo Sabres in the mid-'80s, and they would have been the team nobody wanted to play against. That would have been an absolutely remarkable haul for the Buffalo Sabres, which is why I thought, yeah, it's got to be Probert. Now at 12 to the New York Rangers, I can't drop him lower than 12. On pure talent alone, Sergei Makarov should be, I would go ahead and say, at least top 5 on this list. But he was originally drafted 231st overall because the Iron Curtain is still alive and well in 1983. So in the redraft, the Rangers are taking him knowing he's not coming over for 6 more years, but how good he's going to be. He did win the Calder when he came over, which is why we now have an age limit on Calder voting. It did not exist until Makarov won the award, and everybody said, well, he's not really a rookie, is he? And collectively, the hockey world said, yeah, that's not accurate. So now you have to be 26 years of age or younger to win the Calder, because I believe he was 29 when he came over and won it. So yeah, I can't justify dropping Makarov further down. I know there will be people who don't necessarily like him at that spot in the draft, but I feel like that's the lowest I could possibly drop him. Number 13. To the Calgary Flames, Russ Courtnall. Russ Courtnall played for both Montreal and Toronto. Solid player, fast player too. Very good shot. And it's interesting too with his career. I've done a video on his career already and how he would underachieve and overachieve from one year to the next. Sort of like the Vinny Prospal video I did yesterday. You might never know what you're getting with Russ Courtnall. But he was entertaining. He was a very entertaining player, and at the end of his career, he'd put together a pretty good resume for himself. The Courtnall brothers, their time together in Vancouver, I thought was entirely too brief. I was psyched to have both of them, and then Jeff left, and I thought, well, what's the point of anything anymore? But I didn't burn any jerseys when that happened. But yeah, Russ Courtnall, I have at 13 for the Calgary Flames. Or at 13 for the Calgary Flames. At 14, going to the Winnipeg Jets. I think this is a good spot for moving up from number 100 where he was originally drafted. Gary Galley. Gary Galley, well known now for being on Hockey Night in Canada, but a player who played over 1,000 games in the NHL, had over 1,000 penalty minutes. Good offensive numbers for Gary Galley. I remember him being decent defensively as well. And just all-around solid career that Gary Galley put together. So I'm going to go ahead and have him drafted by the Jets at 14. So the Jets come out with Kevin Stevens and Gary Galley. That's not bad. That's a pretty good haul for the Winnipeg Jets in this draft. At number 15 to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Originally taken at number 12. So not far off from where he was originally drafted. I'll have Dave Gagne. Dave Gagne, solid player for most of his career. It was kind of an abrupt end the way that it ended. I did a career video on him not too long ago. And it just sort of, he went from being, really pretty good, pretty solid player to being out of the league, but coming to Vancouver in that period in time, it could be tough. It really could. And he wasn't having a great year in Florida before that. So At any rate, Gagne had a solid enough career that I'll put him at 15 on this list. At 16, moving up from 86, New York Islanders take Peter Klima. So New York Islanders come out of this draft with Pat LaFontaine and Peter Klima, which is pretty good haul for them. And of course, Klima came through in the playoffs for the Oilers and had his good moments. Yes, there were some rough moments as well off the ice, on the ice as well. But Peter Klima was a young player out of Europe, and not all of them had the self-discipline necessary. Yager comes to mind with speeding tickets he had in the early 90s as well, and his answer being, yeah, I like to drive fast, and everybody kind of laughed. But yeah, I mean, Klima, I thought good goal scorer at points. I did a career video on him not too long ago as well. This is the all the videos I've done and the career videos I've done seem to have all come around this draft, really. Most of these guys I've done videos on. All right, so next up on the board, this is where it's getting kind of tough. Dropping from number 13, Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn, good point producer. There were always rumors abounding about Dan Quinn, this and that, but in the end he did produce points. He was involved in some very high-profile trades as well. Spent his time in Vancouver, St. Louis, Ottawa, Philly. Like, he played around the league quite a bit. He was with various teams throughout. And so, yeah, Dan Quinn I have going at 17 in this draft. If he had been in his prime a little longer, he would have been higher up on the board. That's kind of how that goes. Number 18. Well, let's just go ahead and clean that one up. Because that's not how that's supposed to look. That's fine. I'll just fill that in too then. All right, Uwe Krupp. Uwe Krupp, originally drafted 214th overall. Absolutely excellent defenseman. Who went through, I think he was off out of the NHL, didn't play for over 2 years, and then came back. But scored a pretty famous goal for the Colorado Avalanche, of course, back in '96. And Uwe Krupp, I'm going to have 18th on this redraft. Number 19, to the Edmonton Oilers, originally drafted 51st overall. Brian Bradley, who was point per game for a Tampa Bay Lightning team that was coming into the league. He had his ups and downs throughout. Pretty good player. Played a good long career. I don't think I've done a career video on Brian Bradley. It'd be interesting to do one. I don't think I've done one on Uwe Krupp either. That would be an interesting one too. But yeah, Brian Bradley I'm going to have at 19th overall in this redraft. So, at number 20, to the Hartford Whalers. I don't think Peter Zezel played for the Hartford Whalers. Peter Zezel bounced around the league a little bit as well. A good face-off man, as I remember it. A pretty good center. Played in Vancouver not that long, but again, I liked Zezel quite a bit. Good player, hard worker. And so Hartford in this draft comes out with Dominik Hasek and Peter Zezel. That's not bad. It's a pretty good draft right there. You get your first/second line center, and you get a starting goalie that could be your starter for quite some time if you bring him over in 1983. Like I said, if he came over in 1983, we might be having a conversation where he's above Steve Eiserman, and I'm talking about why, Hasek's the best goalie that ever played the game. But as to when he came over and started playing, I think that does have an influence to how well people remember him. He still had a very good long career, just it would have been so much longer if he came over in 83. And then last but not least at 21st, and I have a few options here. Yeah, I have a few options here. I'm going to go with, I have to go with Kasatonov. I'll say the Boston Bruins, drafting 20th, decide they can wait, and they draft Alexei Kasatonov. So, honorable mentions to Sylvain Turgeon, who I don't take, Bob Airey, and Dave Lowry, who I didn't take either. So that's 3 extra players I had on the paper. And then, when we get into how tough this draft was, so let's go through this round. You've got Neely, Talkett, Lemieux, and I know Lemieux's toughness is up for debate. Stevens, Tikkanen, who's more of a pest than anything else. Bob Probert, and then in this column here, there's not as much of the toughness, although Krupp was a big defenseman. And then you also had in this draft Joey Kocur, Jeff Bukaboom, who played a long time, and I considered putting him on the board as well. Stu Grimson, John Kordick, and Sergio Momesso. So the fact that both John Kordic, Bob Probert are in this draft might make it the toughest draft of all. But this seems to be something I've stumbled upon by accident, where I'm really curious about what would be the toughest draft of all time. And so, yeah, that might be one of those things that maybe there'll be a poll, or maybe I'll do a video on that, because I think it's an interesting topic. But there you go. The first round redrafted for 1983. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.